We're always told that history is written by the victors, but here's the thing. Frequently, history isn't just written by those in power, it's actively hidden by them. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that is absolutely fascinating and frankly, pretty chilling. Let's just see what happens when the shadows recede and the truth actually comes out. So what really separates paranoia from reality? Just think about how the term conspiracy theorist has been weaponized for decades. We've all seen it used to dismiss skeptics as, paranoid eccentrics, right? The people wearing tinfoil hats seeing shadows in every corner. But history has a funny way of letting the truth slip out. And sometimes, the skeptics were staring right at the facts while the rest of the world was looking the other way. In this explainer, we're going to examine 5 massive rumors that actually turned into documented facts. We're talking about 5 unbelievable stories that history eventually revealed to be absolute government-documented reality. We'll walk through the data, the declassified files, and the historical records that flipped these narratives from pure fiction to undeniable truth. Chapter 1: Shadows of the Cold War. Okay, let's dive into this by stepping back into the deeply paranoid era of the 1950s and 60s, the height of the Cold War. It was a time of espionage, nuclear anxiety, and deep state secrets. Out of this era came whispers of a shadow program so sinister it sounded completely made up. The rumor that the CIA was using LSD, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis on unsuspecting citizens to master mind control. Naturally, it was dismissed as bad sci-fi. But the fact? Well, in 1975, the Church Committee proved the nightmare was actually real. Under Sidney Gottlieb, Project MK Ultra ran from 1953 all the way to 1973, using unwitting mental patients, prisoners, and everyday citizens to test the limits of psychic and chemical manipulation. Their goal was absolutely staggering. They literally sought to rewrite human memory. No way, right? But it's true. Knowing the project was finally shut down, the CIA director ordered all records destroyed. They wanted this completely erased from history. But, and we're going to see this as a recurring theme today, a paper trail survived. A hidden cache of financial documents was overlooked, and that is exactly what allowed the 1975 Church Committee to expose the whole shebang to the light of day. Alright, let's move to our next historical case. In 1964, the U.S. government announced that North Vietnamese torpedo boats launched a second unprovoked attack on the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, anti-war activists at the time claimed the attack was fabricated to justify going to war, and for decades they were totally dismissed as radicals. But the fact? Fast forward to 2005, and declassified National Security Agency documents confirmed that the second attack on August 4th simply never happened. A phantom attack. Documentary evidence shows it wasn't some malicious pre-planned conspiracy on the water that night, but rather a chaotic mix of misread sonar data. However, that phantom attack was ultimately utilized by President Lyndon B. Johnson to fast-track America's full military entry into the Vietnam War. 58,000. That is the number of American lives lost in the Vietnam War, alongside up to 3 million Vietnamese lives. Just let that sink in for a second. A fabricated narrative, a literal ghost on a radar screen, was the final trigger for a conflict that permanently altered the course of global history. Chapter 2: The Secret Fallout Harvest. Now, what's really interesting about this next one is we're moving from the jungles of Vietnam back to the laboratories of the Cold War. During this time, a chilling medical rumor started spreading that sounded like pure gothic horror. The rumor was that the government was secretly stealing body parts, specifically from deceased babies, to test nuclear radiation. The terrifying bureaucratic reality? It was called Project Sunshine. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission desperately needed to measure strontium-90. That's a radioactive isotope created by nuclear blasts that accumulates in human bone. Because young bones absorb it the fastest, they urgently needed tissue samples from infants to understand the fallout of their nuclear tests. To pull this off, the government built a global network to harvest bone tissues from hospitals, entirely without the knowledge or consent of the parents. And the bureaucratic paperwork completely dehumanized the process, literally referring to these deceased children just as samples. This truth didn't fully surface until the late 1990s, and when it did, it left thousands of families worldwide utterly devastated, finding out decades later that the children they buried had been secretly altered for government research. Chapter 3: Big Tobacco's Lethal Formula. Transitioning away from government secrets, we're looking at corporate deception. For over 50 years, health advocates claim that cigarette companies not only knew their products were lethal, but that they intentionally made them more addictive. Tobacco executives famously pushed back. They literally swore under oath to Congress that cigarettes weren't addictive and didn't cause cancer. But then, the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement completely blew the lid off of this. It forced millions of internal corporate documents into the public eye, revealing a decades-long campaign of systemic, calculated deception. And this brilliantly illustrates how they did it. These aren't guesses, by the way, these are documented steps straight from their own internal files. Step 1. Acknowledge cancer risks internally while denying them publicly. Step 2. Utilize ammonia chemistry. Why? Well, Step 3 tells us to deliver maximum nicotine hits to the brain much faster. All leading to Step 4, ensuring users simply could not quit. They actively engineered a chemical trap, turning a harmful habit into a widespread physiological addiction. Chapter 4, Global Mass Surveillance Reality. Bringing our timeline forward into the modern digital panopticon. Remember the early 2000s? Hackers kept warning us that Western intelligence agencies were intercepting every single email, text message, and phone call on Earth. The public mostly scoffed. People treated it as this paranoid tech fantasy, tossing around the phrase, "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Well, the fact arrived in 2013 when whistleblower Edward Snowden leaked classified documents detailing the PRISM network. Those documents proved objectively that the NSA and its allies weren't just executing targeted tracking. From the early 2000s warnings to the 2013 leaks, right up to the present day, we now know they had direct access to tech giant servers. They were quietly and continuously logging the digital footprints of millions of innocent citizens. What was once considered a fringe hacker theory is now just a recognized, documented reality of modern intelligence gathering. Chapter 5. Time reveals the truth. So what does this all mean? Does this mean every wild internet theory out there is true? Absolutely not. The vast majority of what you read online is just empty noise, misinformation, or sheer fantasy. But the core takeaway from these documented historical events is simple. Power hates a spotlight. Institutions, whether they're governments or megacorporations, are going to protect their interests, often at the absolute expense of transparency. These cases remind us exactly why maintaining historical awareness and sharp critical thinking matters so much. Because the line between a paranoid delusion and a documented historical fact isn't always logic. Sometimes, you guys, it's just time. Which leaves us with one ultimate question. What are we being told today? If the history of MKUltra, the Gulf of Tonkin, Project Sunshine, Big Tobacco, and PRISM tells us anything, it's that the official narrative isn't always the complete story. Keep looking at the data, and honestly, never stop asking questions. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.